being just a little bit vulnerable encourages others, and it creates this safer environment. There's lots of research that talks about psychological safety, and that's creating environments where people feel safe, where they can disagree, where they can come up with fresh ideas or make mistakes.
Welcome to the Lara Jane Layton Show. This podcast is for you, the person who keeps putting others first. Your self-talk has held you back. You no longer need to take a second seat. Let's explore ways to overcome self-doubt. You can silence that inner bully voice and achieve your full potential. Here's your host, Lara Jane.
Welcome to the show, friend. I have my new best friend, Darryl, here with me today, and this is going to be fun. Have you ever just not felt sure or you're a little bit uncertain of what's going on, and you're leading a team and you're like, oh my gosh, if I don't know what's going on, how are they? And how do you build that certainty? How do you build that trust with your team when you're like, come on, follow me. This is where we're going. And they have no idea where they're going. So we want to, Daryl's going to help us figure out a way to really build that trust when our teams are following us and following our directions, that they go, I know where I'm going. I can do this. And so I'm really excited for this because I know I used to say I was the leader that was the Pied Piper. People just wanted to follow because, but there are other people that, oh, I just don't want to work for them. I want you to become that person that your employees love to work with. But before we get started, we're going to take a quick break, get a word from our sponsor. When we come back, Darryl, help me build that trust with my associates. We'll be right back. Hey, since I rarely have openings in my coaching schedule, I have a new resource out there on my website. It is called the BFF Coaching Network. And I have offered a spot there for any coach that has been on the show to list their coaching. You can go out there, you can listen to their episodes, you can feel a little bit about them, and then choose a coach that will work for you. So LaraJaneLayton.com, the BFF Coaching Network. All right, Darryl, I'm really excited for this because I think this is really important for all of us in every situation, whether it's our family or our work or our friends. You know, when do people trust what you're saying? And how do we build that? And how do we get them to be comfortable? Darryl, help me build trust.
Okay, so it's just great to be here with you, Laura Jane, and our listener. I wrote my doctoral thesis on building trust in hostile environments, and the very start of that process was deciding, what do you actually mean by that, right? And so for me, trust is the willingness to make myself vulnerable when I can't completely predict how you're going to behave. So there's elements of uncertainty and vulnerability embedded in that definition. And so when I'm deciding whether I'm going to trust someone or not, I ask myself these two fundamental questions. First is, how likely am I to get harmed, which is perceived uncertainty? And if I'm harmed, how bad's it going to hurt, which is perceived vulnerability? And those things actually multiply together. So it's uncertainty times vulnerability gives us a level of perceived risk.
You got to pretend like you got this strength and you can move through this because vulnerability is weak.
Oh, wow. So yes and no. And that's one of our limiting beliefs, right? And we see that more so with men than with women. Men really struggle to be vulnerable. As someone who's legally blind and has suffered a number of concussions, I've become a believer that it actually takes strength to be willing to be vulnerable. And that our willingness to be vulnerable is actually a gift we give to others. So I was working with a senior group and I was talking to them about benevolence, which is just a fancy word meaning you've got someone's back. And it's one of the things we look for when we're deciding whether to trust someone or not. And I got them to tell me stories about times when they had helped someone, when they had had someone's best interest at heart. And they told me these great stories, and it was powerful. It's all these senior executives, and they're relating stories, and there's huge smiles in the room. The energy's just buzzing. And I said, wow, this is amazing. Now, if you can just explain to me why you're so effing selfish. And they looked at me and they said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Even years later, that moment brings you joy, puts a smile on your face. You never let anyone else experience that with you. You never ask for help. You never admit you don't know something. You never allow yourself to be vulnerable to somebody else. And that willingness to be vulnerable, that's a gift we give to others." And so we're all imperfect beings. And one of the things that gets in our way as leaders or as parents or as partners is our unwillingness to admit that we don't know something, our unwillingness to be vulnerable with one another, that feeling like we need to be perfect, that it's not acceptable for us to say, "I don't know," or "I was wrong." And so I think your perception of that sort of comment about being vulnerable as being weak, we've got a heavy dose of that. And as I was talking about the model, I was talking about uncertainty times vulnerability equals risk. Well, our vulnerability hasn't really gone down over the last decade,
Mhm.
but our uncertainty is bouncing all over the place, which makes us incredibly uncomfortable. So our perception of that risk is bouncing beyond our threshold of comfort and beneath it and beyond it and beneath it. And then it's just redlining beyond it. So being just a little bit more vulnerable, asking someone to trust you is harder than it's been because we're so uncomfortable already that
Mhm.
taking on just a little more vulnerability feels like a huge ask.
And it was a trick question because I definitely think it takes strengths to be vulnerable. And but I was taught, hide that, stand up strong, act this
Yeah.
way. I can change that part of me, but how do I change the uncertainty around me?
So this is, you're just bang on today. Because that's exactly the question we're thinking about right now. When we're talking about building trust, it's actually fairly simple. It's where does uncertainty come from and how do I take steps to reduce it? And so for me to do that, I need to know where does uncertainty come from? And Laura Jane, it comes from me or us as individuals, and it comes from the context we're embedded in. And so a lot of times we don't understand what other people's contexts are or what their stories are. But if I'm a leader and I'm leading people, it helps them predict my behavior if they understand how I get evaluated, how I'm constrained, what my job description is, what my priorities are, what matters most to me. The context is sort of the formal things like our job description and the rules and the regulations and our evaluation process. But it's also the informal things, the kids I've got at home, the partner I have that's working a different shift than I am, the values and norms that I have, my religious beliefs, my clubs that I belong to, the things I'm passionate about. Those are all elements that drive our behavior, and I used to ask people, I would say, if you could be anywhere doing anything with anyone at this exact moment, how many of you would be sitting here listening to me? But I stopped doing that, Laura Jane, because it wasn't good for my self-esteem. But the next question was then, why are you here? Right. And inevitably it's the context. You've got kids and grandkids and your dogs and your partner. And our listener has those same sort of pulls on them, right? Maybe parents that are aging, kids at home that are going through different phases of life and trying to learn and grow and develop, a team that they're leading at work, a real need to be professional and capable and competent at work, and that need to be on top of your game at home. It's exhausting, but that's the context you live in, and it drives your behavior. And so the more people can understand that, the better they are, more able they are to trust you, to be a little more vulnerable with you, to be open and honest with you. And so I talk about levers that we can pull to build trust. And there are 10 levers in the model that I use, but four of those reside within uncertainty. And so if I'm trying to build trust with you, Laura Jane, I would start off by trying to understand how I could be benevolent. So the three levers within me as an individual are benevolence, integrity, and ability. And it's, what are your best interests? How do I help you meet them? What are the promises and commitments that I've made to you? So integrity is following through on my commitments and my actions aligning with my values. And so what are the values that I have? How have I stated those? What is the story that I'm telling that shows that I'm going to follow through on my commitments? And ability is, what does excellence look like? And I can't be the only one who defines that. We need to define that together. So, for example, I asked you before we started, what does good look like? What would make this one of the best podcasts you've done? And we had a great conversation about that. Now, if we could reach out to the listener, if I could ask our listeners right now, what would make this the best podcast you've listened to this week, or the best you've listened to this year, or one of the best that Laura Jane's ever had? Then we'd start to get a clear understanding of how we can be exceptional without the misunderstandings, without me going on a diatribe about what good looks like. We'd actually have a shared understanding and be able to pull in the same direction. And I'd actually be able to reach out to you and ask for help to get there. So that's how we start building trust, is by including somebody else in the conversation and creating clarity around, what are your best interests? What does success look like for you? How do I help you get there? What are the commitments you've heard? What are the promises you think I'm making, both explicit and implicit? And what does good look like? And then if I can start asking you, how do you understand my context, how I'm constrained? Then you start to get a better sense of me. And it makes it easier for you to trust me. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And what come to my mind is, in at work, we feel guarded. We can't
Right.
overshare about our family. We can't overshare about our problems. We can't you know, but where is that line of over? Who defines that line of over?
Right.
And it's, what do I feel comfortable people knowing, and that will build their understanding. But at the same time, I need to give the other person that same opportunity to share and listen and care. And
Right.
when we can have that open dialogue, that trust level of, oh, they like me even though I've shared these weaknesses about me, or, I'm having car problems. Sometimes we want to hide that because we don't want them to know we can't afford to go get the engine checked, or we probably can afford it. We just don't have time. And so, how do
Right.
we share those things and not feel stupid?
It's a great question. And it's different for different people. So there are no silver bullets, right? And
Hmm.
so part of what I do is get people to try things on and practice some of these conversations. And when people ask me, how do I start? Right? Because I've had folks that I've worked with who said, okay, the model seems simple. It seems like common sense. How do I even start? And so the way we start is by being a little bit vulnerable first. And you make a great point. It's share, don't scare, right?
Hmm.
And so we don't want to go too far too fast, because that people will have this sense of, if you share something with me, I should probably share something back. It's this fancy word called reciprocity, right? And so if I make too big a share too early, people go, oh, I'm not ready to go there yet. And you've just placed a burden on me now. And so they'll become uncomfortable. And so we start a bit of a dance where we'll share just a little bit and see how the other person responds. You know, when we're trying to get people to ask for or accept help, often the best way to do that is to get them to help us first. And so a lot of times as a leader, our listener doesn't want to come out and say, I don't have any idea what's going on. Right. but they can't admit that they've made mistakes in the past, right? When I was in your role, I struggled early. And these are some of the challenges I faced or some of the mistakes I made. Or I can imagine this is a new environment for you. If I was in your shoes, this is what would be going through my head. And making ourselves seem a little more human, being just a little bit vulnerable, encourages that in others. And it creates this safer environment. There's lots of research that talks about psychological safety, and that's creating environments where people feel safe, where they can disagree, where they can come up with fresh ideas or make mistakes. What we need to do is role model and show that, hey, I made a mistake. When it came to my sons, I've got two boys, Thomas and Alexander, and they mean more to me than anything. I tried to role model for them that when I made a mistake, I owned up to it. And I would say I didn't handle that quite the way I would have liked. If I had it to do over again, I think I'd do it this way. And so I showed them that I wasn't perfect. I showed them that I was capable of making mistakes and that it was okay to learn from those. And then I started showing them that it was okay for them to make mistakes, that they were a work in progress like anyone else. If we can give people grace, if we can start with a positive narrative about others, we can interpret the world in a positive way. We interpret the world through stories. That story has a powerful impact on how we interpret what just went on.
Yes.
And so giving others the benefit of the doubt will lead to them wanting to reciprocate. My sons know that I'm not perfect. They love and accept me for who I am. I know my sons aren't perfect, but I have a powerful positive narrative about them. And so, and it was one of the things that got me into this field, studying trust and trying to understand it more, was that people would just come up to me and sit down, like complete strangers would come up and sit down next to me and say, I'm really having a hard time. I wanted to know what it was that was happening there. Why were people opening up to me? Why were they being vulnerable with me? And there's a way we can be intentional about creating a safe environment where people feel safe with us. They feel comfortable with us. And part of that is that grace. It's the acceptance. It's the willingness to see good in others. And it can be hard at times when we see the news, when we hear stories about things that are going on in the world. We see the negative stories that people heap on one another. But we have control over how we interpret the world. And it's our job to try to figure out how to have a positive narrative about others, to have grace for them. Am I off base?
Absolutely not. I love it. I'm sitting here reflecting, um, I think you talk about your relationship with your kids a lot like I talk about mine.
Right.
I remember that time when I was trying to get my son to his room, and the more we fought, the more we were both trying to be right
Yeah.
instead of dealing with the problem, and it got really antagonistic, and I
Yeah.
was turning around, and I set him on my lap, and I said, "There is nothing you could do that you deserve this level of frustration." I said, "I am sorry that I let this escalate. Let's just pause for a moment." This is when he was like 5 or 6. And you
Yeah.
take those moments, you take those opportunities to say, "Hey, I let this escalate. This is on me. Let's just be calm." And if
Right.
you can do that with your employees or your spouses or wherever you are in your relationship, let's pause. I
Yeah.
need a moment to reground into who I really am and not this fight for right. When it was just
Yeah.
sometimes you're even fighting for the same thing for the sake of fighting.
Right. Well, and I used to have these moments with my kids where we'd get into a disagreement and it would start to escalate. And I would think one of us is going to have to be an adult here. And then I'd realize it's probably going to have to be me. Right. And I would say to them, even in this moment when we're really struggling, I love you. And that was an act of vulnerability with my sons, right? Especially when they're little. Because what's the knee jerk response, right? When you're in the middle of a fight, I don't love you. I hate you.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say to them, that's okay. There's nothing you can say or do that would make me stop loving you. And you're welcome to change your mind at any time. But you just need to know that even when we're having our big brawl, our knockdown, drag out argument, I love you. And I don't expect our listeners to do that with their employees.
But you can say, I'm really glad you're here. You don't
Right.
have to use the word I love you, but it's that I accept you. And we're all learning and growing, and we can do this together.
And I appreciate the fact that we're having a disagreement because that means
Mhm.
we're more likely to come to the right answer or a more robust answer than we would have otherwise. And I appreciate the perspective that you bring and owning our own frustration, right? I'm struggling to articulate myself in a way that makes sense. When I when I teach people and my students are struggling to learn, the first thought I have is it me? Am I failing them? Am I not communicating this in a way that makes sense? And so there's a frustration that comes with that. And as a leader, often we have more information than those we lead. We have more experience than they do for the most part. We have a better understanding of what's going on than they do. And so if we can start to create more transparency, a clearer understanding of why we're struggling. When I run into teams that are in conflict, what I end up doing is I'll ask one person, I've worked with senior executives, and I'll go to the first one and I'll say, tell me the story. How did we get here? What's the root of this conflict? And they'll give me their perspective. And then I'll independently go to the second person. I'll say, tell me tell me your story. Tell me what happened. Because the thing we tend to forget when we're in conflict is it's the other person we're disagreeing with has a story too. And it doesn't match with ours. And that's where the conflict is coming from. And so once I've got both stories, I would bring them together and say, person one, I want you to try to tell me person two's story. And so we start to try to go from two different narratives that are misaligned to a shared story. So, how do we understand that perspective of the other person? How do we try to get a sense of what the story might be from their perspective? Because I guarantee you, people don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be an evil jerk today, right? They have their own struggles and challenges and things that are pushing at them, their own reasons for being the way that they are. They're very seldom the villain of their own story. And so, trying to create a shared narrative, and partly that means sharing some of our own story about what's going on and what the objectives are and what our goals are. And partly it's about being curious, right? Rather than judgmental. So trying to get a sense of what is it that's frustrating you? What is it that's got you so upset? What is it that is causing you to react this way? What's the fear that's underlying this resistance? And maybe there's a way we can address that together rather than me just telling you to shut up and get on with it.
And what you're talking about, is I always go back to Stephen Covey's book. I don't know why it's my foundation book, but that Seek
Yeah,
First to Understand. We all want to be understood. The whole reason we get in arguments is trying to be understood. When you can take that pause and step back and go, let me understand your side. You give them the voice, you give them the opportunity, and then you can frame your responses. Maybe you can call it manipulation if you want, but in a way that touches them. Because now you
right.
want, sit somebody down at a smorgasbord and they only like lettuce. You're going, well, I just wasted my money on this huge dinner and all you want is lettuce. You didn't understand their needs. You didn't understand.
Right.
And so you're creating this your own internal conflict because we didn't take that moment. And so,
Right.
that whole thing that you're talking about is like, yes, that is so important. And, it comes right down to that certainty. If you don't
Right.
know who you're talking to, how can you be certain that you're sharing in a way that they're going to understand in the first place?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. And for me, one of the exercises I give people is around the benevolence lever, right? So I talk about levers. We all have the ability to build trust. Some are just better than others. And, our listeners are probably thinking about people that they know who are good at building trust and people who they know that suck at it. Those who aren't very good have a lever that they pull and they pull it over and over again. Those who are better have multiple levers. Those who are really good have multiple levers and they know when to pull which one. And so what I try to do is teach people how to pull these different levers so that they can add them to their toolkit so that there's a better chance of them being successful.
Mhm.
And so one of the levers is benevolence. And that's the belief you've got my best interest at heart. And what I get people to do is have the following conversation. And this is something that our listeners can practice. They start off by saying, I was listening to this guy, Darryl. He was talking about trust. He talked about benevolence, which is really just having someone's back. It's like some fancy word that this academic came up with. And I think I do that, but it doesn't always seem to land that way. Have you ever experienced that?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I got your back. And then you go, I think that was somebody else's back.
Yeah, and overwhelmingly, that's the response people get is, yeah, I've experienced that. And then we get curious about that, right? We dig in a little deeper. What happened? What was the misunderstanding? What did you try to do? Then we narrow the funnel and we say, has someone ever really had your back? What did they do? What did it look like? And we get curious again, right? Because now we're getting hints about how to show them benevolence and what really matters to them and what it looks like for them. And we're priming them to think about what does it feel like to have someone look out for me? Then we narrow the funnel further and we say, what is success for you? How do I help you get there? What would it look like if I had your back? And now all of a sudden we've created an opportunity for transparency. Because if one of the people you lead says, I want to get a promotion, it doesn't mean you're going to be nice to them all the time. What it means is, okay, if that's your goal, then I'm going to hold you to a higher standard. And you're going to have to help me make the case for you to get that promotion when it becomes available. That means that you're going to be in the spotlight more often. You're going to have more responsibility. And I am going to hold you to a higher standard than I hold everyone else. And I can't guarantee the outcome that's going to come, but I can help you make a better case for yourself. That's what benevolence looks like. And my son wanted to get a baseball scholarship. Right. And I said to him, well, that means you need to work hard at school. You need to exercise. You need to eat right. You need to have good relationships with your coaches. You need to be a good teammate. All of these things are the things that schools are going to look at when they decide whether to give you a scholarship or not. And now I'm asking him and nudging him about those things, which are things that every parent nudges their kids about. But he doesn't feel like I'm on his back. He feels like I'm in his corner.
Mhm.
And so how we frame that conversation allows us to then circle back and say, you remember when you told me this is what good looks like for you or what success would look like for you? This is me trying to help you get there. And so
I
it's,
love it. I love it because that's when you can restate, "I have your back," in your own way, not in the literal words, but, "Hey, you told me, and I am" "this could have been months ago." The trust that builds, when you can go, I'm still working on this with you," or, "I still am
right,
supporting you with this." I and not in those words, but when you actually use the words that I'm supporting you with,
right.
it's a magic way of building motivation and progress.
There's an intentionality to it. And Our trust levels are at the lowest we've ever measured. And partly it's because social media has allowed us to create a bunch of relationships that are a mile wide and an inch deep. We've lost some of the resilience that we used to have. When I grew up, I was able to be an idiot multiple times in a row and people were still stuck with me. Right. And so I learned and I got feedback and they gave me second chances because they didn't kind of have a choice. Right. Now we've got a lot of choice. And if people feel like if I make one mistake, I'm done. I hear from so many leaders, if I make one mistake, it's over. And once they get to that place, it means that they can't let any of the people they lead make mistakes either. The more senior we become, the less direct control we have over outcomes. And the more we depend on those we lead to reach our goals and objectives. And we know from all the research that higher trust levels within teams lead to higher performance, more efficiency, more resilience. They're able to adapt more effectively, innovate more effectively. Things just work better. And if you're like any of the leaders that I coach, you feel overwhelmed and exhausted.
Mhm.
There's just
Yes, that is
fires.
a very common trait.
Yeah, right? And partly it's because we're not able to trust those we lead enough to give them the rope to do what they need to do, to trust them to learn and grow and adapt, to allow them to make mistakes, create an environment where we shelter them. We shield them from the mistakes that they make so that they can learn and grow and adapt.
Well,
And
the way you talk is like I'm thinking with our employees, we have to have that same grace we have as we're raising our kids. You know, I wash dishes really well, I can do it perfect. When you're teaching a child to do that or a new employee to step in your shoes, it's going to take longer. It's not going to be perfect, but that's how you teach them.
yeah,
You teach them through letting them do it and letting them learn from the struggles. And, oh, look, we missed this spot. Let's just do it again. It's those simple things that we teach in the process. But
right,
by going, well, look at all these things you did wrong and you're just useless, it's not
right.
helping anybody grow.
No,
It's by like, hey, you did a great job. Look, you finished them. We just missed this one thing. That gives encouragement.
right,
Not that I step back and I don't like being here anymore.
right. Or being able to say, when I first started learning how to do this, I made so many more mistakes than you did. And here's the thing. Every time I talk to a leader, I ask them, are you the same leader you were 5 years ago? The answer is always no. I've learned and grown and developed. Are you going to be the same leader 5 years from now? I sure hope not. I need to learn and grow, and there's things that I'll come to understand. Well, that means you need to step away from the things that got you here, the things that you excelled at, and step into the things that will make you great in this new role. And if they're anything like me, they're not great at something the first time they try it. They are going to make mistakes. And what they need to be saying to their teams is, I'm going to be trying to learn and grow and develop and evolve into the leader that I can truly become. Along the way, I am going to stumble. I may fall. My expectation is that you'll be there, supporting me, helping me get back up, because that's exactly what I'm going to do for you.
How much more trust would you have if your leader said that to you? It's like, hey, I'm not perfect. And I don't expect you to be perfect. Let's just be the best us we can be and then better tomorrow. As
Right.
long as we're continually progressing. And that doesn't mean you don't get those days where you just lay in bed and you what they'd say it with weight loss. You have plateaus. You got to adjust to
Right.
the new you, and then you go again. And so it's same with self development. You grow and you grow and you grow, and it's okay to relax and let your whole body catch up to your new mental abilities or your emotional abilities. We have plateaus in everything. That's not shame. That's allowing everything else to catch up. And when we do that
Yeah.
for our employees, just how much more power do you give them?
Well, and they stop checking in with you every 5 seconds. They stop escalating every decision to you, and you start having more confidence in their ability to do those things. And you start buying yourself time. And we've talked about having grace for others, but a lot of times when I talk with leaders, especially female leaders, it's about having grace for themselves, right? It's the inversion of the golden rule. Treat yourself like you would treat others. Give yourself permission to learn, to make mistakes, to adopt and adapt. And when we create that sort of safe environment for those we lead, they'll go through a wall for us, right? It's what differentiates leaders who are merely adequate from those who are exceptional, is that ability to build stronger relationships with those they lead. Because then those people become engaged and motivated, and they want you to succeed. They want the team to succeed because it reflects well on them.
Team success is so awesome. But no, and so is the overall company success. I've seen departments compete among departments because they want all the glory and all, but sometimes that competition is worse for the organization. It's okay to grow together. It's okay to support people outside of your normal circle because they are in the overall arching umbrella.
Right,
And you play those games where you get so many points if, you do certain things. And if you always cooperate, you get the best overall score, but not team
right,
score. And which one are we searching for? And that's the same with individuals and individual, you know, my department or this group or this project. If we look at the overall team score, are we adding to it or subtracting from it? And how do we work together to really support the best outcome altogether? And sometimes it's letting some of your own ego go and supporting somebody else to get them up high enough that you both can fly better.
right. Exactly right. And that's what higher trust within organizations leads to. It's this belief that if I invest time and energy and resources into the organization's success, that we'll all benefit. And if what the organization needs right now is somebody else to be more successful, then I should be trying to facilitate that. And there's organizations that I've worked with. There's research by Adam Grant that talks about givers and takers.
Mhm.
And givers are the people who help other folks be successful. They facilitate, they create relationships. They just create a lot of positive friction within the organization. Takers are the ones who are sort of self-motivated, take whatever resources they can. They're really just focused on self. It's me before we. And we were talking with an organization. I was talking with a senior leadership group, and they said we started giving out awards to the top performers. But then we realized that a lot of those top performers were saying, yeah, the only reason I got here is because a bunch of other people sacrificed to help me get here. Like, I did well on the thing you're measuring, but there were other people who are really the heroes. And so we started creating awards for those who gave the most. And because that's the kind of behavior we want to facilitate, the we before me kind of behavior. And that's part of the context, right? Is we can both explain our context and create rules within our context to facilitate more collaborative, more cooperative behavior. Part of the challenge is that trust levels have gotten so low, a lot of times people are unwilling to invest a lot of time and energy into an organization because they don't believe that returns come to them. And that's part of the breaking of the social contract. It's what we're seeing in the struggle with young people today. And as a leader, you need to be aware that that old mantra of, work hard and you'll be rewarded and you'll get ahead is now being interpreted as work harder and I'll make more money by those we lead. We need to create an environment where they feel like they're actually benefiting, not that those rewards are deferred. We need to bring them closer to the front. And that means more mentoring, more coaching, more development, more input for those folks, and a clear communication pattern so that they understand how they're growing and developing in the moment rather than saying, yeah, if you put in your time, you'll get your gold watch
Mm,
because they don't believe it anymore.
right. I really am contemplating over this we versus me, and I kind of want to add cautionary. When we always put others in front of us and we deplete ourselves, we are making a weaker
Right.
team. We means you are included. Your energy, your needs must be met too. You're just not going to suck that out of the other people. But if you give everything you've got to everybody else, it's no longer we, it's them. And so I
Right.
want to make sure that when we talk about, not we, not me, it's we, that we're including ourselves and that we're taking care of our needs and that we're getting our rest and our nutrition and our Zen moments where we can pause and strengthen ourselves. Because without that, the whole piece collapses. And so
Yeah.
I totally agree that it's a we, but I want to make sure that we're including ourselves in the we.
That's such a good point because all these things need to come in balance. And and if I want to actually give the best I can, means I need to be in the best shape I can be. Means I need to be having my needs met as well. And you're right. A lot of the leaders we're talking about are doing everything they can right now. And they feel stretched and exhausted. And I think one of the ways we create breathing space is by creating a more trusting team.
Hmm.
But absolutely right that we need to be mindful of our own role in that and how we need to look out for ourselves. And we need to be in a good headspace to lead with compassion and care.
Yes. I love it. And I wasn't correcting, I was expanding. And
Yeah,
let's
I
not
agree
get the
completely.
wrong, because sometimes I did that. I gave more than I
Yeah,
could have, and I came home and I lost identity and became that robot that put everything on the back burner and just do. That's
right.
not healthy, and, we need those moments when we fill our own tanks up with gas. And if you need to pull in and get a dollar today just to get through the rest of the afternoon, but make sure you take the time to fully fill up. And what is it? And when you know who
Yeah.
you are, how do you fill yourself up and do it?
You're triggering thoughts for me, which is one of the comments or conversations I've had with folks is for me, happiness is understanding what are the things that make me happy that I have control over, and how can I do just a little bit more of that? Right. I love being a dad. And so I think about my sons, I think about their best interest, I think about how to help them, but I also think about their growth. And so when I have good dad moments, I feel good. And that often doesn't revolve around telling them what to do. It revolves around equipping them with the skills to handle whatever comes up. And I used to be, so it took me a long time to learn, but I talk about stepping on a rake, right?
Yeah.
The handle comes up, pops you in the nose, it hurts. And I used to be one of those guys who would go, oh, look out, there's a rake. Look out, there's a rake for my sons. And then I realized eventually that all they were learning was that dad knows where the rakes are. And that I needed to change that behavior and allow them to step on the rake and then come alongside and say, wow, that looked like it hurt. What are some of the signs we could have seen that would have told us a rake was coming? And how do we respond now that we've stepped on that rake? Because that's how they're going to learn. And when I started traveling with them, I would, I had a lot of experience traveling. I'm legally blind. And so I've got all these coping mechanisms that I use and these strategies I use. And I realized that I was in the lead all the time. And my sons were teenagers, and I traveled with each of them separately in their late teens. And so I throttled back and I said, let them lead. This is a great time for them to learn and make mistakes while there's someone here that they can ask. And so I would just start saying, where are we going? How are we going to get there? What's the plan? And then I just go along, right? And I remember this moment in Boston. My son and I are walking, trying to get somewhere. And he just stops and he goes, okay, I'm completely lost. I have no idea how to get where we're trying to go. And I'm kind of nervous. I said, okay, well, I noticed that we're standing in front of a really nice hotel. And there are people in the lobby who get paid to be nice to strangers. So we could just ask. And he was like, okay. And then he was back in the lead again. And so you're right. There's a temptation for us to want to do everything for everyone. And that's a short term fix for things. And as a leader, there's a temptation for us to take over things that people are struggling with because it's quicker for us to do it and easier for us to do it. And there's less uncertainty. And there's a temptation to cover for others, provide cover so that they don't get embarrassed or make mistakes or fail. Long term, we're not helping them. And so you're right. There's that balance we need to take of how do we get our own energy back? How do we take a moment for self care? How do we give ourselves grace? And in that same moment, how do we allow others to strive and thrive and fall down and learn from that?
We originally kicked this up about, that clarity and uncertainty and all of these things we've talked about have been ways to help be more certain,
Mhm.
ways to build a stronger team, ways to find that map of where am I going so that we can get there. And that collaboration, the open communication. And there's so much, you know, it's it's beautiful when you see it all click together and you see
Right.
things change and move. And I really have loved so many, all of the points that you brought up, but I didn't write them all down. But I think the key here is really learning to trust yourself enough to let go
Right.
and let someone else experience and get their own growth. And so I think that that's kind of what I'm walking away with is that one piece. But Darryl, why don't you share a little bit about you, what you do, and if someone wanted to have this trust brought to their organization, how would they get a hold of you?
Trust Unlimited is the website. So it's trustunlimited.com. If they wanted to, they could buy the book, which is called Building Trust, Exceptional Leadership in an Uncertain World. And I wrote the book so that if something happens to me, what I know doesn't go away. And I wrote the book in a way that makes sense to real people, that leaders can read and understand. And it's filled with stories and anecdotes. And it's a really practical, applied approach to help people have these kinds of conversations and build trust. And so the work that I do is I'm trying to make the world a better place, trying to help people better understand how to intentionally build trust with others. And so people can reach out to me at Darryl@trustunlimited.com if they would like me to speak to their teams or just have a conversation. And if I can have positive impact in the world, that's one of the things that makes me happy.
Mm, I love the positive impact to the world. What a great mission. I really have appreciated our time. What's that one thing, if I had to take everything we've talked about and go, okay, I've got time to kind of think about one thing this week, what should it be?
It would be, how am I going to have a conversation with someone about trust? Because 95% of people believe they're more trustworthy than average. And that's not only statistically impossible, it's problematic, because it means that if you and I aren't connecting as deeply as we'd like to, I assume it's your fault and I don't do the work. And so, what would a conversation about trust look like? They could reference this podcast, they could share it with a friend and then talk about it. They could go to the website. There's lots of free content on the website around trust and parenting, being a better leader, building trust. All that stuff's free. And if you're thinking about, how do I start a conversation? How do I start trying to strengthen a relationship? Engage in just a small dose of vulnerability with someone so that they can get a chance to reciprocate. And then think about that benevolence conversation we talked about earlier, right? How do I show benevolence to someone so that they start interpreting my actions through a positive lens?
Mm, benevolence. It's a word I've always heard, but I love the way you explain what it means. It seems so simple. It's like, I got this. I can have your back. So, Darryl, thank you for being here today. I super, super appreciate the conversation we've had. It's been enlightening. And I now have a new word to use in my vocabulary instead of I got your back. It's benevolence.
Thanks so much, Laura Jane, for having me and helping me spread the word.
You're welcome. Friend, Darryl and I are not medical or mental licensed professionals. We are here for entertainment. People that have struggled on our path and have found a way to make it to where in the direction we're headed and just want to help you along your path. So thank you for joining and stay tuned for the next episode.
Are you tired of waking up exhausted? You are not alone. If you're looking to take your life back, let's start with the simple step of adjusting your self-talk. Stay tuned for the next episode with your host, Laura Jane. Remember to follow the show so you don't miss the next simple step that you can use to feel more confident. And please leave an honest review.